Harry, welcome back to the show.
Hey, nice CJ. How you doing?
I'm very well. I'm very well because what we're going to do this morning, Harry, is we're going to do what scholars have failed to do for decades: is to dissect, discuss, and potentially even debate the Aeneid. We're going to do it all within about 4 to 5 minutes. So we've got a challenge ahead of us. Do you think you're up to the task, Harry?
Of course, of course. Let's hope so.
So first things first, Harry. Why on earth should we bother even reading Virgil's Aeneid? Do you know it's 2,000 years old? Spoiler: it's not even true. Should we not instead dedicate this time to rereading James Clear's Atomic Habits in order to be cut off the debate?
Definitely not. Definitely not that. But I mean, yeah, but Virgil's Aeneid, I think is probably one of the most important texts from the ancient world. So a bit of context. It was written by Virgil. He's a writer living in the Augustan era. Sorry. So he was born just in the Roman Republic. I forget the precise dates, and he lived up into sort of mid of the Augustan period. And he saw it all. He saw these civil wars, and then he saw the start of this Augustan regime. So if you don't know the history, before the Augustus came along, there was a big period of peace, relative peace, democracy. Well, not really democracy. It's an oligarchy, so it's really rich people in a senate which is elected, but it's not very. Yeah, you can have a working class person come in, really, and these people are leading, and it's going well. It's quite. Perhaps we compare it nowadays to quite a conservative regime. And that happens. And then Julius Caesar, of course, he comes back and he crosses the Rubicon, declaring civil war, and he becomes this dictator for life, really. And then the classic Brutus event when Brutus and other senators stab him and try and get the Republic back. And then there's more civil war, and then there's Octavian, who is Julius Caesar's his nephew, but Julius Caesar adopts him as his stepson. Octavian then partners with Antony, and then he separates from Antony, and there's a whole civil war. And then at the Battle of Actium, which is on the west side, the west side of Greece, that's when Octavian wins. And then Octavian, he becomes this new leader, and then Octavian becomes Augustus. That's a title given to him by the Senate, because Augustus does a beautiful job. In a sense, he's one of the best leaders of all time, because he's definitely a dictator, but then he's always like giving the impression that he's like the savior of Rome. He's the savior of this society, and because of that, he's always doing these little gestures, like giving the Republic back to the Senate, to the people, which makes it seem as if they've got the power, but really, he's in charge, And he does a lot of good stuff. He makes a lot of peace. There's no civil war. Expands the empire. A lot of glory. A lot of victories. And so Virgil writes the Aeneid. He's petitioned, right? And for writers and artists back in the day, you had I was gonna say mécène in French, which in our term is a patron. And mécène, interestingly, the French word is MECENE, mécène, and that comes from Maecenas, and he's like the top Roman Augustan patron. So Maecenas was Virgil's patron, so he'd give him money and say, "I want you to write about this," or "Hey, could work." So like Patreon nowadays, it's like that, but you have one rich guy. And Maecenas was a really cool guy. He was like the head of Augustus' propaganda regime. Yeah, his right hand man, very, very on it. Not a big war guy, but very behind the scenes, really important. And so Virgil was with him, and so Virgil began by writing the eclogues in his early career, which is very, very sort of just his personal poetry. Very, very really great stuff, but not a bit inconsistent. It's about shepherds singing songs, very pastoral poetry in like this rural paradise. But then it's also very political in the surface. He talks about land confiscations, which happened after Augustus. During the civil wars, Augustus, to repay the veterans who fought with him, gave them land which initially belonged to Italians and farmers. And Virgil talked about that, saying, "Oh, yeah, this is a bit rubbish." And Virgil's from Mantua, and there's a great line in that first poem. He says, "Mantua, well, we'll love you, Augustus, if Mantua is saved for us." And it's partly saved, but not completely saved. So, but then Virgil writes the Georgics, and that's about farming, because he starts writing this normal poetry. Then he goes to didactics, so he's teaching people how to farm, and that's a bit more serious. And then he goes to the Aeneid, which is even more serious, epic. But the Georgics are about farming. 4 books. One's about the land, then it's about animals, and the last book's about bees, and that's really good as well. It's more serious, but Virgil does these classic digressions, like a Trumpian weave. He's all going. And he sort of talks about how Epicurean philosophy, how he wants to pursue happiness, pursue pleasure, live in the countryside. And there's this internal battle, really, we see in the Georgics. Perhaps he's got this offer from Maecenas to write this Aeneid. And he's saying, do I want to do this? Do I want to go to this city and have this glory? Or do I want to stay in nature and do what I really like doing? And he chooses the glory. And of course, he is the most important Roman poet ever, the most important Roman writer, you can argue, because he writes this epic, the Aeneid, which is, it mythologizes Augustus's place as Rome's leader. It mythologizes Rome's place as the supreme power for the world, and sort of manifests that destiny for the next sort of 500 years, in terms of Rome's being all powerful all the way into the future, So it's it builds off the two other most important texts, Homer's Odyssey and Homer's Iliad, and it's of the Roman equivalent of that. So because it completes the epic cycle, it takes us from the end of the Trojan War, and where the Trojans lose the war, and there's a Trojan horse which comes in, and then they flee, and it follows Aeneas, Aeneas is the leader of the Trojans, and it's his journey with his people from there. They have a big journey down south. It's quite a complicated journey, but then they eventually arrive at they arrive in Latium, and Latium is modern day Lazio, the region of Rome, and that's when they arrive, and then they sort of found this settlement, and then his son goes on to found properly Rome, really. So yeah, and it was a big propaganda. Well, we can go into that. Is it or is it not? But it is very, very important for the Augustan mission, and it's also a beautifully written piece. So yeah, that's where I start with, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, as you said, between Homer's Odyssey and Iliad. Did Virgil draw inspiration from them, or was it just downright intellectual property theft?
No, it's definitely just inspiration, But I mean, as anything, well, in any literature now, you can sort of pay homage through allusions to other works, and in a sense, well, as it is following from the epic cycle, it does make sense to name places Homer and the Odyssey relate to, but it's and it often he just references characters, he references events, and the structure, the first 6 books are Aeneas' journey, and that mimics Odysseus' journey in the Odyssey. And the next 6 books, apart from book 6, which is something else completely, is the war, the Iliad type of books. But obviously, I mean, the Iliad and the Odyssey were the 2 most important books in the world, in Rome, in the Western world. We know nothing about China and India. Forget about those places. And but in ancient Rome, knew that part of the world, the Iliad and the Odyssey. It said, I'm not sure you know this, but there's Alexander the Great, when he was on, his personal tutor was Aristotle, a philosopher. What amazing that! But then he had him and Aristotle went over the Iliad together, and when he was on campaign, he'd sleep beside his copy of the Iliad. So it's such an important text. So Virgil had to reference that. Even in poets such as Ovid, love poetry and other people, they're always referencing these things, because it's just it's the culture, I guess. It's very important.
So why then will, say, Homer's Iliad be more well-known than, say, Virgil's Aeneid?
I think perhaps because Homer's Iliad is it's ancient in the sense it was written a long time ago, before Virgil's Aeneid, and it's oral poetry as well. So and there's a bit of mystery behind it as well. There's the idea that Homer was a bard, he sung it, and then it's sort of taken down in history, adapted by people. Was there one Homer? Was there different Homers? And I guess it is the story of the Trojan War. And the Trojan War, in some sense, you can see it as the moment when so the mythical world before that sort of becomes history. Because Troy did fall. There was an ancient city called Troy, and the city was destroyed in history. There is evidence for that. So but obviously the Iliad's all about gods and stuff coming down. So maybe that's not completely true. But it's interesting to see that, and I think perhaps the Iliad stands out more than the Aeneid is because it a foundational work, I guess you could say. And then there are these big heroes, there's Achilles, and then there's Hector, and it's a war book, So I guess perhaps that's why it stands out more.
In classic antiquity, the writing very much reflects the writer's personality and style. From the Aeneid, what can we deduce from Virgil's character by writing style?
It's a great question about that. I'm actually applying some masters on that. On that thing right now, so that's great. So yeah, so I think well, there's a great Proust line from the French writer Marcel Proust, and he says that he talks about he's watching this musical performance of this composer who's just passed away, and he watches it and he sort of has a meltdown when he's watching it 'cause it's so beautiful, and he realizes that that's what art is all about, and art is. He says a great line. He said, "Oh, like if you could give me a superpower, I wouldn't take wings. I wouldn't take to a I wouldn't make myself young again because then I'd just be myself and looking at the world as I normally do. The true superpower is to see the world, see the 100 worlds that everyone else sees. Yeah, and that's the superpower, and that's what art allows you to do is to see the world through other people's eyes. And that's a great line from Proust. And I think that's the most important thing in any book. We're reading the perspective of someone else, and that's why Proust's book himself is so important. But I think Virgil, it's a bit harder. For example, you have Horace, who's Virgil's contemporary. They were good friends. Maecenas loved Horace as well. Maecenas gave Horace a farm for the stuff he wrote, and Horace was saying, "Oh, thank you for my farm." But Horace's poetry is very public. He's saying, "I did this. I think this should happen." Yeah, and stuff like that. Whereas Virgil is definitely more in his eclogues. He's a bit more outspoken, and and in the Georgics, his second work, he does reference occasionally his other side. At the end of the Georgics, the last line is him referring to this is written by me, who initially began by writing these little poetry, these little poems about shepherds. But the Aeneid is definitely a lot more difficult to work it out because yeah, it's very hard. But there's two main voices on this. I could go forever about this, but there's two main voices where there's sort of the official stance. When you read it, you think, okay, this is propaganda in a sense. This is mythologizing Rome. Aeneas is this good guy. He's embodying Augustus. This is a good Roman mission. This is our story. And then there's so much more you can go into. And in the Latin, there's so many echoes, so many words used specifically, which cast doubt on that, which cast a sense that, well, perhaps Aeneas isn't the greatest guy ever. And it casts doubt on what's really going on. And if Virgil really believes this, or if in fact, and a sort of current theme which runs throughout all of Virgil's work is the idea that sort of peace can only be achieved through war, and like there's no real peace because there's no real victory from war because everyone just dies. And there's a great moment in his Georgics where he just talks about a farmer farming, and then suddenly in the future he'll be digging up these great bones of men who have passed away in the civil wars and big shields, and that's a big bit in Virgil's Aeneid as well. And it's great because as any book, you sort of have to read the author in, one could argue. And the reason why Virgil Aeneid, I would argue, stands the test of time, and also the Iliad and the Odyssey, is because these characters are so complex and so relatable. For example, Achilles in the Iliad, he's a very flawed individual, like we all are. And Aeneas is great because he's trying to be this good hero, good leader, but he's such an unwilling leader, and he's sort of forcing himself to follow the fate to try and create a good future for his son, but he doesn't really want to. There's two terms: there's pietas and furor. Pietas means piety, and that's a duty, honor to one's family, to one's gods, to one's state. And then there's furor, and furor, fury. It's like this passion, this unchecked emotion. And there are two forces inside of Aeneas, and the scholars write a lot about this, and that he's constantly trying to be this person displaying piety, but he's always giving away to. In reality, he's always like he can't control these worse emotions, his passion, the stuff, the violence inside of him. So and that's why it's so relatable. And I think Virgil, he's casting doubt, but also just opening up. It opens questions, you could say. Like we can't for sure say, oh, Virgil means this, or Virgil is creating this character to cast doubt on Augustus. But no, but he's asking those questions like, why is this a good portrayal of Augustus compared to Aeneas? Well, I don't know. Well, I can't spoil the last moment, but the Aeneas is unfinished. But the Aeneid ends with Aeneas. He's got Turnus is like the enemy in the last books. He's this native guy, this native king, son of a god as well, who lives in Latium, and the Trojans come in and it's not really their fault because the gods are orchestrating this war. But then Aeneas gets him. He's conquered everyone, and Turnus says, as he's sort of lying on the ground, and Aeneas is holding him, "You don't have to kill me. Like, you won. This is it. Just you can spare me if you want." And Aeneas sort of thinks, okay, maybe I can. And then he sees this armor which Turnus is wearing, which is the armor of one of Aeneas' fallen comrades, and he sort of says, "No, you're going to die now. Like, go down to hell." And he sort of kills him, and then that's how the book ends. And that's the kind of thing, a classic idea that Aeneas is trying to be this pious guy, trying to be a good man, but in the end, he doesn't. He like gives into his bad side, which is, and that is, what does that mean for Augustus? But there's so many. Well, I'll say one more thing. There's there's a great book, which it's quite esoteric, but I mean, if you read the Aeneid and you like it, and you can read this. It's called Further Voices in Virgil's Aeneid, and it's by this guy called R.O.A. and he's called Oliver Lyme. But that's his stupid initial in his name. His book Further Voices is sort of a revolutionary book because it's really about the idea that Virgil is not a big propaganda piece. It is so much which makes it seem as if Augustus' new regime is actually quite bad and quite built on this idea of death and murder. And interestingly, Oliver Lyne was also rumored to be the MI6 recruiter at Oxford as well. Just gotta say, dual life, this guy. But I mean, and there's a great moment as well. So there's a lot of little echoes to sort of the cruel man who Augustus was. Because there's a bit in book 11 of the Aeneid when Aeneas' friend Pallas, who's like a young guy entrusted in Aeneas' care, he dies. And then Aeneas, because of this, he sacrifices 9 random Italian enemies, he executes them just to avenge that. And that's brilliant. That's definitely referring to Augustus when he was Octavian in the civil wars in 40 BC in the town of Perugia, Italy, when he sacrificed 300 senators, just executed them, just out of vengeance. So there's lots of stuff like that. And I think Virgil, it's great to try and read Virgil's voice in because it's definitely there. But it's hidden,
As a subtle digression, you mentioned the MI6 recruiter at Oxford. Certainly in the peak of the Cold War, it was said if you ever studied Russian at Oxford, it wouldn't be long after your graduation before you got tapped by MI6 to go work undercover as a spy. Is any of that still going on?
I'm not
Murray, have you ever been tapped by MI6?
If I knew, I wouldn't be able to tell you. No, I mean, I think there's definitely rumors. I think maybe it's more the case back in the day when I think they're definitely looking for people who are more qualified than some interesting like classics. Because classics was a big degree. They're like, these people know their stuff. But obviously now I know nothing. I don't know. I don't know Chinese. I don't know Mandarin. But I think if you go on the army side, I remember Oxford. Someone told me that if you do the officer training corps and things like that, then I think maybe you're a bit more likely. But most of the people at Oxford are just there not to party, but they're just to mope about, So definitely not the type, perhaps. But I'm sure it still goes on. Definitely.
If we go back to the Aeneid, Aeneas references pious quite a lot. I think over like 30 times. So then there is that conflict with rage and passion. Is Virgil trying to push against the main characters and certainly senators referencing themselves as God or picturing themselves as God? And here is Virgil trying to create a leader with whom is actually fully human and fully deals with the human passions.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think he is trying to deconstruct this idea that leaders are godlike, and it's strange because there's in the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, there are these two planes. There's a divine world and the human world. And the divine world, they're awful. The gods are really awful. If you can get one thing out of the Aeneid, is that the gods are they'll use humans just for their own ends. They're bitter. They hold resentment. They're angry and they're cruel. And I think so. Virgil was definitely casting this idea about what are these divinities really serving for. And Aeneas, I think it is refreshing really to have this character who makes the bad decisions. There's a great book 4 is him making horrible decisions with Dido, who really loves him, and that carries out and he also abandons his wife. Well, not intentionally, but he loses his wife when they're trying to flee. Tropes, which is quite questionable. But I think the gods and Virgil, interestingly, he was an Epicurean, and then the big thing about them, as I said before, is pursuit of pleasure and happiness. But another big thing is rejection of gods, rejection of superstition. There's a guy Lucretius who wrote a good book, De Rerum Natura, which is the nature of things, and that's a very, very interesting book because it's very dense. He talks about science, he talks about atoms and things like that, which is quite interesting. And he says, the atoms, everything's made of atoms. And he talks about that you shouldn't worry about the gods, because even if they do exist, and you can cast doubt on that, he says even if they do exist, they don't care about you. They're so far removed. They're not even involved at all. He sort of sees it as maybe as like these forces of nature, and then Lucretius actually comments and mentions, like, think of what people have done in the past to appease these gods, like killing people, and look how they're depicted in epic. And so I think Virgil was definitely rivaling that a bit and thinking that these gods aren't that good. But it is also epic tradition. Homer talks about that as well. But I think definitely there's sort of casting shade that people who see themselves as mighty, and like hubris, right? The idea that if you think of yourself as too good, then you're going to be knocked down, which happens a lot throughout the whole epic. There's these hints. Yeah, exactly. I can give you an example if you want of that. I don't want.
Go for it.
Well, there's this guy in book 2. So book 2. We said we wouldn't go into these little books, but hey,
Big massive. Right.
yeah. Well, hey, book 2. For anyone that doesn't know, so book. Well, I'll do a little at the start. So in the start of the Aeneid, we begin in medias res, which means in the center of things. It's a great literary technique. So you begin in the middle of the action, and this we have Aeneas. There's a bit about the gods, and there's an introductory bit about Juno's anger, which basically causes the whole story. Juno hates the Trojans. She's the god. She's like the queen of the gods, and she hates Aeneas and the Trojans. And then it begins Aeneas in a storm, and there's a huge storm caused by her. And then after the storm, him and the Trojans, they arrive on Carthage, which is modern day Tunis, and they find this. They go and they're trying to look around. Where are we? And it's the kingdom of Dido, and she's his queen, who comes from Lebanon, actually, from Tyre, which is a very important city in our days right now. It's a lot's going on there, not good things, but and yes, that's happening there. And then so she comes over and she's building the city, and then Venus, Aeneas' mother, who's the goddess of love, she makes Dido fall in love with Aeneas. And then Dido says, "Oh, come have this big dinner and tell me all your story." And in the next 2 books, book 2 and 3, are all about Aeneas saying, "This is what happened after the Trojan War, and this is why we're here now." And it's a period. Time in the first part of the book is a bit hit and miss. We don't really know how long time's been, but I think it's 7 years, more or less 7 years it takes them to go from Troy to that point in time. And so book 2 is all about the Trojan War and the Trojan horse coming in and the battle, and then Aeneas leaving. But there's a great bit, a really vivid and really interesting part, which is when Troy has been ended, and this is sort of the end of perhaps a sort of symbolic end of the war, is when Priam, who's this old king of Troy, the top leader, he's killed by the son of Achilles. And there's a beautiful painting by a French painter called Lefebvre. He's got a really weird name. It's Lefebvre. It's called The Death of Priam, and he submitted it for this competition, the Prix de Rome. I'm pretty sure that's the case. But he won it, and that meant he could go and have a scholarship in Rome and study and paint. So this painting is like so literary. So it's inspired by these lines, and it's very vivid. And it's basically Pyrrhus, the son of Achilles, killing Priam on the altar, the Trojan altar in the center of the house, and it's beautiful, and it's so vivid. And then Priam's described in the Latin as this quivering old animal, and Pyrrhus doesn't just kill him; he sort of puts his sword in right to the hilt. It's proper. But then Pyrrhus, this idea of hubris, because he sort of shuns the gods so much, he's either killed by Apollo later on in the myth, or just gunned down by Apollo, as the gods could do, or he's killed by Orestes, who's another guy, and he's killed at the altar of Achilles, his father. So it comes back to bite you. Karma's a real thing, and
it seems to pop up quite a lot in the Aeneid, as with a lot of other texts. What is the ancients' relationship with fate?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think fate is just, in a sense, I think it's almost how we see it nowadays to an extent. We don't really know what it is. We don't know if it exists or not. But fate was often tied up with the gods as well. And in the Aeneid, it's quite hard, and Iliad as well, it's quite hard to distinguish whether fate is linked to Jupiter or Zeus in the Greek text, or if it's something outside of him. And I think probably the best answer is that it is something which exists outside of Jupiter, Zeus, because it's weird because he always references it, and it's almost as if he's gone in. He knows what's going to happen, but he can't change anything. The fates, they're often described as these women, these female deities who sort of, they no one really knows who they are, but they weave. They've got these. They're like weaving a tapestry, and this is the fate. This is how your fate is coming out. So I guess there's the idea that it could change. It's something being woven, being created. But for example, Jupiter or Zeus isn't in control of it, because there's a great moment in the Iliad when Sarpedon, who's Zeus's son, he's a great soldier, and he's about to be killed, and Zeus thinks, oh, I'm gonna stop this. I could save it, but he can't change the fate. And I in the Aeneid there's a whole fate in the first 6 books. Well, yeah, 6 books. There's a whole. I describe it as that Aeneas, he can't go anywhere. Like when he turns a corner, there's someone saying, "Oh, this is going to happen," and probably he's like, "For God's sake, leave me alone. I don't want to hear about it." But yeah, and it's very, very important. And I think the best way to see it, at least in the context of the Aeneid, is that, I guess, it's almost like a chessboard. Aeneas will checkmate. He will arrive in Italy. He will found this state which will become Rome. But there's an infinite amount of ways to reach this checkmate, an amount of moves. And that's how the goddesses come in. And I think perhaps that's the same for our lives, right? Maybe, I don't really know what I believe in this set of things, but perhaps that we can only act in as much, in as much as our genes control or etc. But there's infinite amount of variability and freedom within this. And I guess because we will die. So there is, and it's like that, I guess. But in the Aeneid, because Juno constantly changes the workings of how he'll get there, constantly changes what's going to happen, and that's really what I'd say. So fate's a complex issue, definitely.
So how then does the almost surrendering to fates compare with the gods constantly meddling with their journey? What's the balance between the two?
Well, I think because I think in the Aeneid there's a lot of there's a lot of dramatic irony, because we have these two planes. So yeah, with dramatic irony, if people don't know, it's the idea of so when the audience or when the reader knows something which the characters don't know, and yeah, so when the this happens a lot, because obviously we're seeing what happens to the gods and saying, oh, I'm gonna stop this. So at the start, when in the storm, Aeneas probably doesn't know. Well, they don't know that Juno has started the storm, and that's happening because they hate, or she hates Aeneas and then with the Trojans. And so I think a lot of the times they think, okay, this is our fate. This is just random occurrences happening. We've just got to. The gods are doing this. We can't stop it. Just see what happens. And there's a great line. I think I've got it here actually. I did it in my class yesterday. Here it is. Quid erit superanda omnis fortuna ferindo est, which means this is in one of the later books, no, book 5, sorry, when Aeneas is thinking, oh, what do I do? Something's just happened, and then this old man who's sort of an advisor says to him, whatever our fate will be, like whatever fortune throws our way, we will overcome it. Right? It will be overcome by us by enduring it, So it's an idea that we can get through anything. Whatever happens, like we just gotta trust the fates, And I think that's sort of mindset. But there's a whole other idea that because there's a lot of omens all the time. They say, "Oh, Jupiter, if this is in a case, please show me." And then there's a flash of lightning. They say, "Aha, there we go." That proves that what I was thinking is right. But then omens are also very subjective. What's a good omen for someone could be a bad omen for someone else, and it's just quite random. But luckily, if you are related to divinity, then for example, there are lots of prophets always talk about, and you need to say, oh, this will happen. So I think Aeneas does have a sense of the fate which is going to happen, and that must be quite nice in a way. But one thing I will mention the last is that Aeneas, he does have a sense of a fate, what's going to happen, and he's constantly told this, but he's never told like how he'll get there. So in a sense, he's got some no script, no map, because he doesn't know where Italy is, and if you look at book 3, which describes his journey, it's quite hard to picture it. So it goes up, down, and he basically goes south all the way down and curves up to Tunisia. And he's constantly trying, he doesn't know where this promised land is, but so eventually he finds it. So he knows he's got this fate, but he's just trying to trust the process, even though it's extremely difficult and extremely, time consuming.
What was that, the English translation of the Latin line that you just read?
Oh, I can read to you in the perfect translation of David West, who's that's the Penguin edition of the Aeneid. I think it's very accessible.
Would you say that would be the best one for people to start reading?
Definitely, yeah. It's very accessible. It's written in prose, not poetry, and yeah, it's a great text. So the translation of that Latin which is whatever fortune may be ours, we must at all times rise above it by enduring it. So yeah, it's a great line.
It's not too dissimilar from Ernest Shackleton's family motto, which was "By endurance we conquer," and that was
Well,
his ship
exactly.
when it did sink, but did a pretty good job at enduring whatever the fates threw at him across the Antarctic. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of I think partly another reason why these epics last to exist and to prevail even in our modern times is because they're so relevant. Storm that people on expeditions, storms. We've got people here like Virgil and other people, and Ovid, for example. Ovid does this in his Tristia, which is his poetry of exile, and he's in a storm, and he sort of describes it in quite sort of a dramatic way. And we don't know if there was a big storm or not, and he's definitely playing into this epic tradition. But yeah, we got there's tales of endurance which exist in these classic times, which which inspire people to this day, and I think that's why it's so important. I could argue.
You mentioned that it is an unfinished text, and Virgil died before he was able to finish it. He left express wishes for the text to be destroyed. That obviously didn't happen, given that we're talking about it some 2,000 years later. What's the story there?
To be honest, we don't know that much, but apparently, so Virgil did die before he completed it, and then he said, and he asked for it to be destroyed, but then Augustus, of course, and no, I don't think so. 'Cause it's lovely work, and I mean, I think it's completely fair that Augustus didn't burn it, or didn't destroy it because it is such a masterpiece, and I think partly Virgil is this sort of author who sort of, in a sense, I don't want to say couldn't handle the pressure, but is definitely his values of living in the countryside, this idea of peace and love and rural paradise, and it's just the simple life, which is Epicureanism. That's definitely put at odds when he's living in Rome, being funded by these giants, these political giants, and he's running this text. So I think he found it quite intimidating, quite pressurizing, and so definitely he's quite nervous about it. And then when he said, "I'll just destroy it," maybe in a fit of upset. But I mean, people make loads of myths about how people died. There's that guy Lucretius who I mentioned before, the philosopher, because he talked about gods and how superstition is rubbish. The gods don't care. He was almost cancelled throughout antiquity by people, and in the Christian times as well. People said, "Oh, this guy's being blasphemous," and so people semi-cancelled him. So because of that, the work wasn't that much appreciated until not fairly recently in sort of the past few hundred years. But so I think I'm not sure where I was going with this, but no, yeah. What was I saying? Okay, but because I remember it now. But then because people there was this guy Saint Jerome, and he created this rumor that Lucretius died like drinking a love potion or something like that, and it was obviously just made up nonsense. But so people create loads of stuff about death, and we don't, and history, a lot of history, Roman history, is just fiction as well, so we don't. Well, part of fiction, unless it's Tacitus, who's a good historian. But Pliny the Elder, for example, who's a really cool guy, like ultra polymath. Really, he's the founder of our encyclopedias. He did a quest to discover everything in the natural world. He talks about people who have like dog faces and stuff like that. And so what's he talking about?
We spoke about it a bit on our last episode, Carnival, in which Felix does he stay in the country and lead the quiet life, or go to the big city, and potentially become great to it, in a bit of a sense, sell his soul. What is the conclusion some 2,000 years later on which is the best option for people to choose?
Interesting. I don't think there is a conclusion really, because I think I think perhaps just you said. I think as a few people say, I've heard people say that you choose your own sacrifices, right? As in Virgil sacrificed perhaps his well-being, his peace of mind, but he's remembered forever, which I guess is a futile legacy in itself, because we don't live to find out our legacy. But yeah, it is interesting, because I think perhaps Virgil would have created loads more writing if he had stayed in the countryside. But then I think if you, on the other side of it, Ovid, for example, he was the top, after Virgil, he was the top dog in Augustan poetry time. and he was very he was a superstar really, and he thought he was invincible. He wrote poetry about the one he got exiled for was the ars amatoria, the art of loving, and which pretty much promotes adultery, promotes affairs, and that was he was cancelled by Augustus because of that, and for other things. And so and he's in a sense, in a Icarian sense, he flew too close to the sun. And Virgil, I think, in his own sense, I think Virgil, like I think many artists are, he was ultra sort of anxious, ultra sort of self-conscious, like, oh god, I'm doing this now, and then I'm doing that. I think perhaps the character of Aeneas reflects that, because Aeneas is this guy who's in a sense, where in book 2 in this Trojan War, he wants to die in Troy. He wants to get killed and fight defending his city, but he's told by the gods, no, you have to go and you're the leader now. And he's constantly saying, oh, I don't. He's really like, he has a tough time. He hates what he's doing. Really, he loves Dido, and there's a great scholar who says, because the Dido and Aeneas relationship is very, is it love? Is it just passion? But one scholar says that this is like the most important moment in the whole book, because Aeneas, the consequences of leaving Dido span out across the whole of the work, and Aeneas sort of sees himself afterwards as this person who loved Dido and who was loved by Dido, and it's very tragic. But yeah, if Aeneas could do what he wants to do, and he's very troubled about what he wants to actually do. I think he just wants to chill out and not have all this responsibility. But it's something that almost mirrors Virgil, right? Because he's sort of sacrificing this thing for a greater good. And in the Aeneid, it's almost sad because the gods who he's trying to be pious to, they're very cruel and very unethical, and so he's doing this for a lie almost, but he's still doing it anyway. So yeah, and in a sense, he's a Christ-like figure. But if Christ was very violent and very poor, but yeah, but it's a sacrifice. He's a big guy about sacrifice. So I think sacrifice is really, I think, yeah, I mean that's the message from Virgil, and from the Aeneid, really, that sacrifices, you've got to choose your sacrifices. Because Aeneas would probably be a lot happier if he'd stayed with Dido, or if he had just died at Troy. But it wasn't to be, and he's constantly forced to continue, which is sad. But yeah,
The Iliad was very much interlinked with the politics of the time.
Mhm.
I was thinking about, was there an instance in recent times that the Aeneid has come up in political life? And I've got 2 examples.
yeah.
One's from the 1960s. Have you ever heard of Enoch Powell and his River of Blood speech?
Oh, I haven't heard of the speech. Go on, tell me.
So anyone who doesn't know, Enoch Powell was a politician in the post-war Britain, 1960s. He makes a speech and is talking about the influx of immigration coming into the country. And he quotes Sybil in book 6.
Oh, interesting.
And he says, it's like a Roman soldier looking over the river Tiber. Soon it will be foaming with much blood.
Interesting. Okay. The river Tiber foaming with much blood. Interesting.
Yeah, and that he was drawing a distinction between the influx of immigration coming into the UK, and he thought the speech would go down terrifically and launch his bid for the leadership campaign. He gets thrown out of the shadow cabinet, and his career was destroyed as a politician. Netport.
Interesting. Yeah. Choose your Virgil lines correctly. God, interesting. Yeah, that's a strong line to use. Yeah, rivers of blood, talking about immigration, perhaps not the not the best one to use. What was your other example?
I was recently reading Michael Gove's review of Boris Johnson's book, and he likens it between a cross between the Aeneid and Mr. Biggles. Yeah, that's the only one I've got. But I've written down. I thought I'm going to save that for Harry when we do our podcast.
That's amazing. Interesting. I mean, yeah. Well, I think the Aeneid is so important. Yeah, and it's such a I think it's good for politicians because, as I said before, it's so layered. There's so many voices, interpretations. So you can use a quote and you can say whatever you want for it, And there's that one line, I think, which I maybe I mentioned in our last podcast, but the idea that in the 9/11 Memorial Center there is a line from Virgil's Aeneid, and it's in book 9, and this is a moment when Virgil steps in. He does this now and then when the narrator speaks in and says over the text, "Oh well, this is." And he says, because Book 9, I don't want to spoil it, but Nisus and Euryalus, these two friends. Book 9 is a little epic. It's called an Epilion, which is a story within a story. And these two friends, they have a nighttime raid of the enemy camp. They kill people and then they die themselves, and they're trying to defend each other. And they're in a brotherly love, so it endures, and it's a great moment. But and then the Virgil says at the end, "Oh, never will history erase your name," or something like that. I don't know the exact translation, but then the brilliant minds in the States after 9/11 decided to use that quote in the Memorial Center, and yeah, I think I've mentioned before, it's troubling because it's a quote glorifying Aeneas and Euryalus, who were technically the terrorists in that instant, killing people while they sleep. So it is a strange line, but I mean, yeah, but Virgil all the time, it's you. I might actually make a video about that Enoch Powell thing. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. Yeah, like that. In fact, yeah, I think it's so important, and there's some brilliant lines from it which you can use all the time, really.
Because of the circles in which you are operating in,
Mhm.
the legacy of university and certainly in the work that you're doing now, it will be very common for people to have recreationally read the Aeneid. Do you prescribe it to the wider world as something in which they should read, or is it going to be confined to the corridors and classrooms of a university hall?
I think it's really important. I think to read this of the Iliad, the Odyssey, and importantly the Aeneid is very, very important. I think it is quite in a sense inaccessible when you first start, because there's a lot of references to sort of myth and names which unless you have this sort of training you may not recognize. But I think it's still worth reading and worth playing through with it. You can read the introduction. The introduction the Penguin edition is really, really good. Some great details there. So I think it is very, very worthwhile because as I said before, there's constant references to it. And I think the classics, if anything, they serve a purpose just to be able to you open up a whole new web of sort of allusions, and you can notice a lot more, loads more symbols all around, because there's so many states and US states, countries, they all use Virgil as that sort of as proper, yeah. They use quotes from him as as mottos. The US is pure Virgil. Virgil quotes it as emblem, and so I think it's very, very important. And Virgil, if you want to read any Latin poet, I think Virgil's probably the best because yeah, he's at the best, the most important. Some see him as the absolute best writer in terms of his images, and the Aeneid is so vivid as well. If you read the translation, it's so vivid. And I think even if you read it and you don't get, oh, I don't know these references. I'm running these group classes right now. More will come in February. Well, no, but people are saying I've got loads of people from the States, Europe, and people are saying, oh, I like this bit, I like this part. People like different parts for different reasons. They love descriptions. One woman from California loves the moment when that's what Aeneas shoots this deer and then lays it out and sort of cooks it for everyone. So there's so much to get from it. There's so many different moments, and yeah, it's a great work. And I think everyone should read it, definitely. And it's a shame it's not like prescribed in schools, because in Italy, for example, it definitely is. So yeah, so definitely I agree. Yeah.
Can you mention online classes there? That might pique people's interest. What are they and how do people access them?
Aha, yeah. So yeah, some online classes is 10. I do a 10-week Virgil course. I'm midway through one now. Next one's beginning in February. So groups of 10, and there's on Sundays or Saturdays at 2 times, and then we just go through the Aeneid book by book, and we begin by summary each class, and then we look at 3 passages in detail, 3 important passages, and we look at art as well. There's a lot of visual art and paintings being inspired by the Aeneid, a lot of other books and literature, and we look at what scholars say. We also go into detail, and we usually have a nice discussion. We go into breakout rooms, and then we come back, and then we have a WhatsApp group chat as well. We discuss more things, and so that's really, yeah, and it's it's £35 a lesson, so it's £350 in total. I wish it were free. I wish I was a villain on it, but yeah. So yeah, it's £350, and yeah, no, it's great fun. We're really enjoying it, and it's I think it's good. I think it's worthwhile. People are enjoying it, which is nice.
So the big question then to finish on, Harry, is we have approached our 45-minute mark. When Aeneas gets to Sicily, he organizes the funeral games and he sets up a boxing match, a foot race, an archery competition, and a boat race. if you had to participate in one of them, Harry, which one
Oh,
would it be?
brilliant question. Well, we actually in the Aeneid class we just did book 5, so that's great. I'm not really sure what I do really. I think I'd maybe say the I think the boat race. I think because the guys in the boat race. Well, interestingly, the guys in the boat race, the 3 helmsmen of the Trojan side, they're called like Menestus, Sergestus, and Cloanthus. And this is a sort of reference by Virgil because these names are very similar to top Roman families, the Sergi, the Memmi, and the Cluenti. So Virgil's definitely doing a little hats to these people, and I think they're like the culture people, in a boat. They don't have to sort of fight or have to run. They're sending a boat. Yeah, like, it's culture, So I'd say the boat race maybe.
Very good. Great. Harry, that was a skip through the Aeneid. It arms people with enough information for them to go and read it for themselves. Thank you very much for your time as you now head off to London.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.